Here we are again. It's nice to be with you. I missed you all last week while I was away. Yeah, I missed you. So it's good to see you. It's nice to be back. A couple of announcements. We have a spring retreat coming up, April 9, 10, and 11. It's in a couple weeks, so please register for that. We'd love to have you. The retreats are small, they're intimate. There's time for questions and response and lots of meditation. A tremendous amount of grace often comes during retreat. And there'll be a special blessing there for you. A blessing with the invitation to awaken, to deepen, to claim a new life. A new life. So we hope to have you there. Reminder, so all the groups are back on track again. So I'll be here Wednesday night, Friday morning for the Kundalini support group, and again on Sundays. So anyways, so let's just take a moment and just close our eyes and give ourselves permission to go inward. And let us start this evening, this day, with a gentle prayer of springtime, inviting new life to come into us, new life to awaken from within, new life to flow into us from heaven. Let's invite a new mind, which is silent, open and spacious, and yet filled with a quiet stream of wisdom. A new life, a new mind, a greater mind than this old, outdated mind that we have. Let us invite new love, greater radiance to come forward, to awaken in all of us. New love, greater love. Let's just invite that energy forward as a presence of warmth and aliveness and divinity, inviting it to shine into you, to flood your body. And any aspects of the heart or the emotional nervous system which have felt beaten down, let that reawaken and kind of lift off that heavy blanket of despair or numbness or deadness or habit. Invite a greater love, a greater light. And so just noticing a radiance lighting up throughout the body, throughout the nervous system. And shining from above the crown chakra, down through the head, the throat, the shoulders, the heart, solar plexus, the belly, the pelvis, the legs, the feet, below the feet. A radiance and aliveness, a flowing divinity awakening within you as you. And with this prayer, with this meditation, we invite a greater strength and power to awaken in our hara, our pelvis, our solar plexus. Power of divinity, the strength of Buddha nature. Just breathing in and breathing out. And no matter what type of week you've had, or day you've had, or month or life you've had, just envisioning yourself. The mind clear, spacious and wise. The heart radiant, compassionate, loving. Unified with all of life and creation. And this strength within the belly, the spine. It's like a sense of nobility and integrity, a power, knowing who you are and what this life is about. So just gently breathing in and breathing out, feeling, opening. And experiencing your power, your strength, your love. Your love. Now for some of you who are looking overly serious, I would invite a greater transmission of love, a radiance, maybe even a smile to come forward. Say, yes, yes, I'm here not just to seek and to chase, or to try to get somewhere else, but to love. And for some of you who are serious, I'm going to invite you just to feel into the hardness of being serious, the hardness of grasping and seeking, the hardness of wanting life to be different than it is. But instead to acknowledge a softness that's here, that's shining out of your eyes, that's glowing in your heart. And it's okay to be serious. It's okay to know what your life's about. Sometimes seriousness, it's like wearing armor in a rainstorm. It starts to get rusty and kind of heavy. It gets to be too much. And so for any of you who have armor on you, around you, guarding, protecting yourself from this crazy world, and I'm not going to disagree, it's crazy out there. But right now in this moment, can you take the armor off? Can you soften a little bit? Can you give yourself a break? Can you give yourself a break? And just notice the sound of the breeze. Notice the trees outside. Notice the spaciousness of the room. Notice the deepness and the fullness of your breath. As you begin more and more to take the armor off. When we wear armor, well, it just feels like hell. And I know all about armor. I spent a good half my life wearing armor, too much armor. It really weighs down the shoulders, weighs down your heart, weighs down the soul. And so forgive yourself for wearing the armor habitually. Forgive yourself for being so guarded. And give yourself permission just to kind of look around and to see and to feel the hugeness of the sky, the spaciousness of this room, the gentle love that's here. to soften, just to soften. And so, you can open your eyes if you like, or keep them closed, whatever suits you. And with it being spring here in the, I guess, northern hemisphere, I'm going to invite you to take on the attitude of new life. You know, with springtime, it's a time to shed layers. You know, sometimes with winter, we get so bundled up, or, you know, a lot of times when I was working, I spent a lot of my life working outside. I'd be at my teacher's house, you know, shoveling roofs or building in the middle of winter. And sometimes, yeah, like when you're building, you're carrying boards up ladders and, you know, sheets of plywood up ladders, and the ladders are slippery and there's snow and ice everywhere and you're tripping all over the place. Sometimes you kind of just get like a hardness in your body where you're just really tense all the time. You know, with spring, you know, there could be this sense of, oh yeah, I don't have to do that. I don't need to be so tight in my body, trying to guard myself from the cold or guard myself, brace myself from falling on the ice. Spring here in Colorado, it's very confusing. It's one day it'll be 50 or 60 or 70. The next day it'll be snowing a couple feet, snowing sideways. And you know, the plants here in Colorado, they have to be really tough, you know, to outlive the harshness of winter and to begin to open again in the spring. And even when they're opening, they're getting beat up. They get really beat up because it goes hot, cold, warm, cold, warm, cold. And so I'm going to invite you to trust that it's okay to open. Even if you open and someone gives you a mean look or says something nasty to you, you let your guard down. Can you open and open again and open again and open again? And realize even if someone does attack you when you're open, it's a lot better way to live than to be closed all the time, to be shut off from life. And if we want to be awake in this world, we have to know how to be open outside of the yoga studio. Inside the yoga studio, it's easy to open. But outside the Dharma Center, can we be open? Can we be open in the hospital, the job site? Wow, you're getting your corona shot or choosing not to get the corona shot. Can you be open? Can you be open? Can you be open? Whatever life is throwing at you. Whatever it's throwing at you. I went to Encinitas, California last week. It's the place where Yogananda, his ashram, is. And unfortunately, it was closed, you know, because of everyone's so scared of this virus. But, you know, I went and I just stood outside the gardens. I went down to Swami's beach. And I opened. I opened to the coldness of the Pacific Ocean. I went and I ran, I jumped in, I made sure I jumped in every single day. Open to that freezing cold Pacific Ocean and just smiled and received it. And I noticed, you know, the body, it wanted to shut down when it started to feel the cold. It was like, oh no, you know, run away. But I kept running into it. And if we want to be awake, we have to say yes to life, whether it feels warm or freezing. We want to say yes to life. Yes to life. And so I'm going to invite you just to sit for a moment and just to look inside. And just ask the question, do I say yes to life? Have I been saying yes to life? And where are the places I've been saying no? Out of habit, out of defensiveness? Where are the places that I could perhaps open a little bit more fully and become intimate with life, the essential nature of life? Where are the places I could become more intimate with life? And so, it's important to really question your life. Really question. Most people have no idea how the force of habit veils their divinity. I was outside working today, and I was trying to drill through some things, and out in the garage, drilling through some metal, and I was pushing down on the drill, and I noticed if you're going to push down, all I need is my arm muscles, my biceps and tricep and forearm to be tight when it's pushing down. But I noticed my whole back was locked up, and there was a sense of rushing. I realized, here's an old habit here within me where I'm tense. As soon as I pick up, my tools, my body gets tense because it just remembers that working in the cold. And the body has these habits, and these habits veil our divinity. It veils the spaciousness, the love that's here. I took a deep breath. I realized it's Sunday, Craig. There's no rush. You're not on a job site. No one's breathing down your neck saying, why is it taking so long? And so we have these habits, these places we shut down. And so it's important to investigate, where do I shut down out of habit? Where do I say no to life? Where do I say no? And so I'll leave you with that question. Okay, looks like Richard has a question. We'll see if Richard comes back on the video. There you are. Okay, let's see. Richard, do you have a question?
I do have a question. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. I missed you. Okay, my question today, Craig. I have two. I have to pick one. Okay. So what does embodiment mean to you? And I think I'd like that answered on two levels. So just average human being who is not on an awakening path, just living their lives, what would it mean for someone like that to be embodied in still a way that's full? Like people don't need to be awake to be living full human lives and to be on their path. And so I'm wondering what embodiment might look like there. But then, of course, I'm also like, what does embodying one's awakening really mean? We hear that tossed around so much in the non-dual community these days, and I'm curious as to kind of what your perspective is on that. So, and what your lived experience of that is. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Yeah, so just a normal definition of embodiment. Um, Now, for me, I just like to ask a question, if we're going to discern whether we are embodied or not. Uh, like if I ask you, what do you feel in your heart? If you can give an answer like that, there's a sense of embodiment in the heart. You take it a little deeper, like what do you feel in your belly? Again, we want that connection to be there. And connection's maybe even the wrong word because connection means like you're up here and you're connected to down there. I want you to know that you are your belly. I want you to know that you are your heart. Now, my first son, he's an adopted son, and he's a really funny fella. But when he was young, um, I took him to soccer, like to play soccer when he was like 4 or 5 years old. And he went out to the soccer field, and all the kids were running and chasing the ball. And if anyone's seen little kids' soccer games, it looks like kind of like a swarm of bees, and they're all like just like running together chasing the ball. Like they don't do positions, they all just like run in this thing, just all chasing the ball, just kicking it. And like that's being embodied, on a soccer field if we're Europeans, a football field. But my son, he was like this the whole time. Just like looking in at the clouds. His head was in the clouds. Was not chasing that ball. He was just looking up there the whole time. And, that's just where he was. And he was so disembodied that he would walk outside like in the morning. Like we'd get him ready to go to school and drive him to school in the morning. Say, hey, come on, let's go get in the truck. And he'd walk out to the truck and there'd be frost on the ground. He'd be totally barefoot, just like walking like it was nothing, and I look at him and say, Noah, like, where's your shoes? Like, do you have consciousness in your feet right now? Can you feel that it's freezing? Like, where's your jacket? Like, he wouldn't have a jacket on, he wouldn't have shoes. And he still lives a lot of his life, uh, is like outside of his body. And um, so he's just real etheric person. So he's a hard time getting embodied. And oftentimes he gets hurt, because he's not embodied. And so, in a funny way, when he gets on a boat, he gets real embodied. Something about the ocean connects him back to the earth just because the power of the ocean, I think, reminds him, like to get in his body. And so, a question that is always surprising to me is when I meet someone new and I just ask them, like, what do you feel in your heart right now? And they always look up to their head, and I say, stop looking in your head. I say this so many times. Stop looking in your head. Feel in your heart. This is how you embody yourself. And when you're embodied, like you are aware. So now we're going to kind of transition in the spiritual sense of embodiment. When you're embodied, you're aware of your 7 chakra centers. Like you know how you feel within yourself. So you're aware of these energy centers and how you feel. Because your energy centers, it's literally like having 7 brains. 7 brains. Most people think they just have 1 brain. And so when you're embodied spiritually, you can feel in each of the centers. Like the centers are communicating to you, just on a regular basis. Like I was walking the other night at the beach, and where I was staying was up on these cliffs, and so I'd walk down at night, a staircase or a trail down to the beach, a couple 100 feet down below, and it was dark, and the ocean, the tide had come in, so the ocean was smashing up against the cliffs. And as I was walking down, like, and started getting closer to the ocean, just a sense of fear started to arise in the chakra centers. Just good, healthy fear of like, hey, like be careful. It's dark, it's night, the ocean is raging right now. And, so when you're embodied, your body speaks to you and you're aware of it. It's like you talking to you. There's a sense of aliveness there. And so, those are two kind of basic, understandings of being embodied. There's embodied on a physical level. There's embodiment, on the chakra level. But if we transition now and speak about, say, embodiment in regards to spiritual awakening, most spiritual traditions are actually traditions of transcendence. And so they're trying to teach you, you're not your body, you're not your mind, you're not your emotions. And that is an excellent teaching if you are egoically identified solely with your body, with your mind, with your emotional nature or whatever. And what it does is it shows you, oh, you're not the body, you're not the mind, you're not the emotional nature. You are this presence. And this presence is otherworldly. It's not just of the flesh. And so most traditions, they invite you to kind of dismiss the mind, do the neti path, like you're not this, you're not that, not this thought, not that emotion, not this, flesh, meat suit, whatever. And when you awaken into that, it's brilliant because all of a sudden you feel, like someone who's had a life sentence in an ego. And then the ego has temporarily been transcended. And it's like you're out of jail and you're just running free. And it feels so amazing just to be. I can remember the first time that it like really happened in a substantial way. I was like, oh my God, like I feel incredible to be not identified with anything related to the character Craig. It's just so much space. And I just realized myself as space. And that's incredible for a period of time. But I'll say this, like I didn't do anything. Like after I had the transcendent awakening, I didn't do anything to embody myself. The awakening, it did the work of embodiment. Like the intelligence of the universe, it came down into me. So first it kind of lifted Craig up and out of the body and gave me just exquisite presence of freedom. And that went on for a couple of years where I was just ridiculously disembodied. I was just living in the transcendent. It was one of the highlights of my life. It's like nothing could touch me. It was just brilliant. There's no pain. But then eventually, that intelligence, because it has a transformative aspect as well, it just doesn't have like a freedom aspect. It has a transformative aspect. It started to actually come down into the body. And as it did, the consciousness of the body, of the human personality, of the ego, of the all the trauma, everything, it just all started to come forward again. And I thought, just like most people think, like that I did something wrong because, well, there was a lot of pain there. And a lot of people trip over this. They wake up and, up and out, awakening, which is transcendent. Then the awakening goes down and into. And again, I didn't do anything to make it happen. It just started happening on its own. And again, if we look at embodiment purely as, say, the willingness to feel, I mean, that's what creates embodiment, is the willingness to feel. The willingness to feel. And there's this intersection with how the ego operates and how non-dual spiritual awakening, non-dual embodied spiritual awakening operates. And it really plays with this factor of feeling. So if you are unwilling to feel, that kind of, sort of, sounds like a program of ego. Like an ego is like, I like to feel really good, but I don't like to feel anything bad. And so I just noticed this intersection around feeling. So ego doesn't like to feel anything bad. But in order to be free in a liberated sense, you have to be willing to feel. Because if you're afraid of feeling, that's the opposite of being free. And I hope that makes sense, that in order to be free, we're not just free from, we're also free to experience. Most people just want to be free from life, which again is brilliant. But life wants you also to be free to live, free to incarnate. And so in a real sense, I felt, the later stages of the awakening process, the maturing stages, that I had actually incarnated, consciously incarnated. Like the first incarnation, like you're forced into it in a sense. You just wake up and you're in a body. People are trying to give you shots in the hospital or whatever. That's the first incarnation. But after non-dual awakening, as it starts to descend into the body, and you consciously choose to feel, you consciously choose to be here, you consciously choose not to run away from life, not to run away from life. So I can remember talking to Adya about this one day. I just was like, I really like the character Craig. I really like who I am. Like, there was just a great sense of love for Craig through the embodiment process. Through the transcendent process, like before transcendent, it was, I hated Craig. All I wanted to do was get rid of him. He was the problem. He was the obstacle. But through the embodiment process, I fell in love with me, like with the character, with the personality, with the body. And in the same way, like you would love like a son or daughter that you have. So it wasn't like loving me egotistically. It was loving me like the same way I love my children, where it's just like, I love that guy. And it was almost like there was this rebirthing of incarnation. But it came without fear. And so whereas like before, there was like a fear of living. And in the later stages of awakening, like pre-awakening, we're all afraid to live. Like we're just terrified of this world. But say post-awakening in the maturing, it's like we're afraid not to live. Like we just want to live. We want to be here. We want to experience. We want to share. We want to love. We want to experience the fullness of what we are. And so I don't mean just in human ways, but just in all the realms, divine and human, all of it. There's a real healthy lust for life. A lust for life where it's like, gosh, I'm so excited to be here. To be here. And within that, there's that changing, where the ego initially had this thought of like, I'll do anything not to feel pain. Like when that falls away, we become quite curious about pain. And through the process of being curious about pain, different aspects of your being start to awaken more fully. Let me speak a little more about that so that's not confusing. Because so often what pain does is it veils what we are. Like just say, for example, if I have, say, hatred towards my father for most of my life, that hatred and that pain is going to veil my heart. And so where that veil is, there's not going to be the experience of love, or the love is going to be limited, or it's going to be covered. But when I become curious about that pain and open to it and willing to feel it, then that veil begins to be liberated. And where there was once a veil, there's now a greater radiance. A greater radiance. And so just in a natural way, embodiment, it just, to me, it just seems like a natural flow of evolution. It's just like it's hardwired into the process. And so if you just listen to what life is trying to show you, transcendence will happen, and then embodiment will happen. And both are necessary. If you only embody without, without transcending first, there's a good chance that, you'll never know how free your soul is. Because with the freedom of transcendence, there's just a sense of like, oh, like I'm not limited to this body, to this, this flesh suit, not limited to this mind. I'm not limited to this psyche. I'm not limited to this lifetime. And within that, there's almost like a false sense of courage that comes forward, but good courage. It's like, I don't have to be so worried about death anymore. And because I'm not so worried about death, I can actually live my life, embody this life. I can actually plant my feet down on planet Earth and see what happens. See what happens. Experience the good and the bad and the ugly. So anyways, I hope that was helpful. I mean, I could say things like, if you're disembodied, you should do yoga, or you should, do Tai Chi, or, do kickboxing or whatever it is. But you should exercise more. You should eat carrots, But those things I think are just like, anyways, those are things that we can do, but we're meant to be embodied. Like God didn't give you a body for you simply to discard it. But the other thing is God didn't give you a body for you to identify with it fully 100% either. Like I was just in California, and in California, people drive around in cars that are shiny. Where I live, everyone's car is covered in dirt. And they're pretty, they get beat up because, you run into snowbanks, and, it's just a little rougher here in Colorado. But in California, people are driving these really shiny cars, all these Teslas and, Porsches and Maseratis, and even like brand new shiny Honda or whatever it is. And, I could see like, like some people, they overly identify with their car, with their vehicle. And, that's what happens to human egos. We overly identify with the body. So that's not embodiment, to overly identify with the body. Embodiment, it's all about feeling. Like, are you feeling? Are you in this thing? And are you feeling the divinity of the body, the temple-like nature of the body, and also, just the humanness, the felt sense. Like, are you here? Are you here? And so, anyways, beautiful question. Okay. Yeah, good to see you, Richard. Okay, so here's a question from Kirsten. Kirsten, I'm going to try to unmute you here.
Hi, Craig.
Hi.
Hi. I researched a bit skanda from hearing from moments when you're in meditation. From what I understand, you call upon skanda, and I researched, him because I really feel I grow a lot through understanding things archetypally, and I wanted to see if you can speak a bit about him. What I found that drew me was that he is a warrior, but he has been brought up by, I think it's seven goddesses. So there's a natural integration of the feminine within the warrior. But I wanted to know if you could speak a bit about what pulls you towards skanda, and also if you could speak. I'm feeling very pulled to understand or deepen my understanding of how to surrender and how to trust. And perhaps if there's any link with skanda.
Yeah, that's a good question. So, my teacher, his name was David, and his teacher, uh, her name was Hilda Charlton. And Hilda, she went to India uh, a long time ago. Like she was one of the probably first Westerners to follow a spiritual path in India. Like she was she was pre Ram Dass, so she was, let's say, 20 or 30 years before Ram Dass. In fact, Ram Dass used to actually come to Hilda's classes when she taught in New York City. And so Hilda she was young, and she went out to India, and she went for 17 years. And when she was there, well, she ended up, in the jungle, I believe, in Sri Lanka. And she ended up at the Skanda ashram, and Skanda came to her and started to develop a relationship with her. And so that's, anyone that I'm connected to, it's normally through the lineage. And it's a funny thing because, like oftentimes we think of, like, if we grow up Christian, we pray to Jesus. But I think, I think more in terms of, like, if we grow up Christian truly, it's because Christ has called out to us and said something like, hey, you belong to me. You belong to me. And so the connection with Skanda was, well, Skanda connected to Hilda, and then Hilda would teach, and Skanda would come, just kind of hang out in the background and just shine light. And shine light, into the world of my teacher David. And then that same light started shining into my life when I met my teacher. He called upon Skanda, and this grace came, this light came, very brilliant light, warm, fiery light. And Skanda is considered the general of the forces of light. So yes, a warrior. But if you ever see any of the pictures of Skanda, um, in a sense, if you look at any of the Indian gods and goddesses, when you look at them, I'm going to say this word, and I don't want this to be misinterpreted PC any wrong way, but gods and goddesses, oftentimes they look what I'll call, in a sense, trans. In a sense, trans, masculine, feminine. It's like a mixture of the two. So there's a soft feminine aspect of Skanda, like Skanda rides, like like what he rides on is a peacock, and that peacock is Jyoti, like that's his spirit animal, or his buddy. I don't know how to say it properly, but the two of them, they come together, and so there's this warrior, and if you see him, he has a staff, and there's all this light pouring out of him. But also it's like he's hanging out with the peacock, and if you look in his eyes, he's really soft and just lovely. He doesn't have a big fat beard, doesn't look like a grizzly old man. He looks genderless, and maybe a different way to put it. And so for me, it's just all about the direct experience. I mean, there can be stories of this and that, and, myths and this type of thing. And when I was young, I used to think, well, what are gods? Like, oh, that's all just made up. But when the gods started to come to me, I realized, oh, this is not made up. This is, there's whole realms of gods, of goddesses, of, for Tibetans, of dakinis, out here. Like I live on the edge of Navajo land and Ute land. And so there's these different kinds of gods and goddesses and spirits and forces. And it's just all about whether your heart has a connection to them. And so I call upon Skanda to bring forth power, light, strength. This is something we really need on the spiritual path, because in the spiritual path, like I was speaking about before, oftentimes we just get beat up. We get so beat up by life. And, one of the things that my teacher used to say to me, he said, Craig, if you need help, ask for help. And he didn't mean like to ask him. He meant to ask Skanda. Ask Nityanandaji, like ask, Ganesh, ask Christ to come forward into your life. And you'll find some gods you'll have a great relationship with, and they're part of your lineage. And then other gods, not so much. They're just not, they're not part of your tradition. And, the thing that I invite is, if I call on someone or something or some force, just to be open and to see what happens. To see what happens. And to receive the blessing. To receive the blessing. In the way the Buddha taught, the Buddha taught in a way that was really independent and individualistic. The Buddha was like, I don't want anything, just non-dual awareness. And some people, that's their path, and that's beautiful. But, for me, I think of being a human being as really complicated, complex, messy. Like this last year has been probably the hardest year of my life. Because of just different pain and trauma that's happened to my family. And so I'm calling upon God. I'm calling upon Christ. I'm calling upon God. Go, come forward. Come forward and bless my girls. Bless them, hold this family. Meet them with love. Support them. Support my mom. Support my aunt. Support all these people who are struggling. Support us. And non-dual awareness is great for me, but it might not be so good to say if my daughter's struggling, if my wife is struggling. And so I'll call upon one of the greats to come forward and shine light in their direction. To shine light in their direction. And, again, Skanda is just a very powerful, brilliant light. And could I use more of that? Yeah, sure. 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 I'll take more powerful, brilliant light in my life. Yes. Yes. And it's like the energy of the Christ. The energy of the Christ is incredibly healing. If I'm feeling really sick or run down, I'm going to call upon Christ. And so with any of these forces, it's just a matter of, like during the Wednesday meditation, or even like right now, as I invite the presence of Skanda, is just to open and just to feel in your heart and just to notice what happens to the nature of awareness when you call forth the gods, when you call them forth. And again, it's like, if I look out at, say, most people in the world, we could all use a little little more money. We could use a little more support, a little more health, a little more joy, a little more rest. The same way we all use a little bit more money, we could use a little more light. And so I don't care how awake you are, even if you're a great Buddha, call upon more support, call upon more light. See what's out there, what's available to you. Because God wants to help. God wants to support. God just doesn't want to throw you down on planet Earth and cut you loose. A funny thing my teacher used to tell me, I've told this many times, but that like everyone has a group of angels to support them. And the angels are all like sitting around, feeling almost sad because no one calls upon them. It's like, well, if you have an angel, why don't you call upon them? You say, hey, can you help me out? And people use it for parking spots all the time. I think that's silly, but why not? But if you're sick, if you're run down, if you're struggling, you're having difficulty in relationship, the power of prayer, it's amazing. And it's free. It's free. It doesn't cost you anything to open to these greater forces. And so, the thing that I encourage everyone to do is don't even take my word for it, but be open and experiment and just see. And see. Like see what comes forward. See what's available to you. See. And so anyways, beautiful question. Thank you. Yeah. All right. If anyone else has a live question, I'll welcome those. I've got a number of emails. I see Nick's here. I think Nick wrote me a question. Let's see here. Hi, Craig. Why is it that some people are involved in many spiritual practices but do not have awakening or kundalini awakening? And then some people, not even spiritually inclined, have a sudden or spontaneous awakening. Well, that's God's will. So that's God's will. Now I could say that's God's will to every every question. Why is it this way? But the thing that I've seen in my own life is like this isn't my first rodeo. When I came into this world, like I knew how to meditate, I knew how to pray, I knew how to connect to Christ. I knew how to do all that. When I was a young child, I knew how to do these things. And why is that? Well, because I had many lifetimes, previous incarnations as a monk, as a priest, and a spiritual individual. And so I developed these things over time. And so in this incarnation, after some practice, the awakening started to come. And with other people who say, well, I'm not spiritual, but all of a sudden I'm waking up, it's because in previous incarnations, there's a good chance you were awake or semi-awake or well-practiced, or you did the work. You kind of cut the path in previous incarnations. The third answer I'll give is we are all spiritual beings. There's no such thing as not being spiritual. Now, you can be overly connected to your job and your career and your egoic identity. That doesn't mean you're not spiritual. Everyone, literally every single one, whether you're a cold-hearted gangster or a CEO business guy or ballerina dancer or a yogi, We're all spiritual. You can't not be spiritual. You can be confused, though. You can be confused. And so we're all spiritual. We're all spiritual. And if God wants to wake up in you, she will. She will. And she'll pick the day and the time, the moment. And this life, we don't always know what it's about. And for some people, they have to sit on a cushion for 30 years before they have one glimpse, because that's part of their path. And there's a wisdom and intelligence behind that. That's between them and God. And other people, they sit down once and boom, they have a big spiritual awakening or kundalini awakening. And they say, oh wow, this is meditation. So, yeah. Okay, here's another question. Hi, Craig. Does non-dual awareness split itself into different souls that reincarnate? That there's actually a separate person or soul besides the ego construction? What's your insight into this? Yeah, I want to be careful with this question because it feels really philosophical, and there's some teachers that say one thing and other teachers that say another. I always invite individuals just to look at your experience and just to acknowledge that there is obviously an individual here. There's obviously an individual. And a fun thing would be, if we all stopped being spiritual for a minute and say you came down to my local dojo and we dressed you up in a gi and I got to choke each and every one of you out, and you would realize, oh yeah, there's an individual here being choked right now. There's an individual here. And is it purely an individual ego? No. Is there a soul here? Absolutely, there's a soul here. Absolutely, there's a soul here. And the soul has a life. The soul has a trajectory. The soul has a lineage. The soul has some angels, in particular angels, a group of angels just for that one soul. A soul has connection, to certain gods and goddesses. Like the reason many of you show up each week is because you have a connection with this. That there's something here that brings you back. Something here. And so yes, there's a soul. And yes, there's a unity. And yes, there's only one. And yes, there's neither of those things as well. And absolutely nothing. And absolutely everything. It's both and neither. And this whole life, that's what's so magical about it. It's a ridiculous paradox. I can remember laying up in bed one day and, my tongue started to stick out, like super far, like I was Shiva, and I felt the presence of Shiva, that I was Shiva. And then I became Kali, and then I became Ganesh, and then worlds were just being literally just vomited out of me, created and destroyed. That I was the one, the creator of all universes, all lifetimes, all incarnations. And yet, that experience ended, I was just a kid just sitting there in a bed, drooling on himself. What was that? What was that? That was crazy. Like, that was wild. I've had that experience, a number of times where it just felt like universes were being born out of me and destroyed within me. Within me. And it's like, what is that? And then other times I just feel like a dad who's, trying to tie some shoes on tie the shoestrings on a 7-year-old's feet, while she's dancing around, kicking and poking me, And so it's both and. Like we are the one, and we are all one. And yet we're all individuals as well. And sometimes the individual can even implode and disappear, and there can be no one here, but just unity. Sometimes that can dissolve, and there can be no thing here, like a non-experience of any kind. And that's a whole different thing. And I think that's one of the beauties of this is we start to experience like a multi-dimensional nature, a multi-dimensional nature of what we are and how we can be. And so does non-dual awareness split itself into different souls that reincarnate? Yes and no. Does it split itself? I don't like the word split itself, because you can be a soul and be the fullness of non-dual nature and be not split. Okay, I think that's probably enough on that, because again, for most people, it'll just get philosophical. And the great question is can you experience any of this? Like you obviously can experience yourself as an individual. You can experience yourself as an ego. Can you experience yourself as an individual without an ego? Like what's that like? An individual without an ego. What's that like? What's that like? You know, if you had Hamid Ali in a room with Eckhart Tolle and Adyashanti, and say my teacher David, they're all going to be having a similar unified experience, but they're also all going to be having a different absolute experience and a different individual experience. Because the absolute presents itself in different beings in different ways. Like Buddha nature is absolute, and so is Christ consciousness. And when you feel those, when you experience them directly, there's a difference there. There's a difference. Doesn't mean that one's right or one's wrong. The mistake most people make is they say one is higher and one's lower. The one I'm experiencing is the highest. And those Christians, that's a lower form, or whatever it is. You know, a great being can realize that they're all absolutes. Christ consciousness, Buddha nature, nirvana, self, no self, the self, cosmic consciousness, Satchitananda. They're all realms of the absolute. They're all little different flavors. Okay, let's hear from Matthew. Let's see, Matthew, I'm going to try to unmute you here.
Hello.
Hi, Matthew.
Nice to see all of you. I wanted to hear your take on embracing our darker side and how when we cut ourselves off from our darker side, our light can't illuminate fully, because I don't mean darkness as a negative, I mean yin and yang, how we need both on the spiritual path to really harness and embrace our power. Because I know for me, a tendency is to get lost in my light nature, to cling to the light, and I become very imbalanced and inauthentic and have like tendencies towards meekness and powerlessness.
Yeah.
So it's important for me to turn towards my darkness and to embrace it and to let my personality become a little bit more dark tinted. And I find when I do that, I actually have more joy, more creativity, more real power to serve with. And this came up for me because I got a little, something in me got a little triggered in meditation. When you were telling me to smile, I was kind of just watching this movement within me saying, well, it feels forced to smile. Like I was wondering, can we be open and relaxed, even if, we're embracing and sitting in our darker nature?
Yeah.
And it was beautiful, the question about skanda and needing both the warrior aspect of it. And I was just kind of wondering your take on that with the spiritual path, needing
Yeah.
both light and dark and embracing both.
Yeah. That's a good question. Um, one of the things I like to call the darkness is radiant darkness, because we have maybe this is just from me, just watching too many Star Wars movies as a kid, but it just seemed like the dark side of the dark force. It was synonymous with being evil and or being bad or being wrong. Like there's good and there's bad, and there's light and there's dark. But in the dark, to me, like the radiant darkness is this great mystery. And if we truly want to be liberated in a full way, we have to walk into the darkness. To walk into the darkness and see what's there, see what's been covered up. I, like you, was so attracted to the light for most of the spiritual path. And, and because of that, I like the light, and I like to have light and silence. And so that made me, in a sense, like you said, really meek. Like I would never speak, I'd never talk, never talk. In fact, I wouldn't even feed myself. I always made myself last, putting myself last, and just kind of became like this, person who just wanted to feel good all the time. And at some point, I just felt called into the darkness, like the darkness was calling me. And again, the radiant darkness was calling me. And as I began to walk into the radiant darkness, I started to hear a growl, like a rumble. There's a rumble of, it's like a volcano. And, I can remember just like a funny story about, I was in Costa Rica once, and I was in these hot springs. The hot springs were actually kind of like flowing off the side of a volcano. And I was sitting there, and the volcano, it just started to open up, and it just made the loudest sound you could ever imagine, just the earth just being ripped apart in a little tremor. Sounded like thunder and the earth being ripped apart all at once. Just like this growl of just energy. And it really scared the life out of me, sitting in those hot springs. But, later when I was sitting in meditation, it was like that, just like this growl coming out of the darkness. And, it didn't feel sweet. It didn't feel like Amrita. Like Amrita is like this sweet nectary bliss. It felt like, oh my God, like if I walk in that direction, that thing's going to rip my head off and then eat all my guts, and, just like tear me apart, And so, but there's just something in me that just felt called to it. And in that darkness, I discovered my power, more and more power. But it wasn't just like I walked into it and there was this great pot of gold and I was given my power. I had to face, all kinds of disturbing images and violence and greed and lust and killing and genocide and just like all the vileness of humanity. People being chopped apart with swords and hacked to death, and it's just crazy, the thing that's in the psyche, in everyone's psyche, in the collective unconsciousness. So it was walking into that and embracing that. And the more you embrace that, you're actually doing the work of liberation. So the tendency of light is light wants to shine into darkness. Love wants to walk in the direction of pain. And if we just say, oh, I just want to feel good, I never want anything ever feel bad, like we're not going to get far on the path. And so it's this type of thing that makes us tough. It makes us tough. And one of my teachers in the Tibetan tradition, Lama Tsultrim, like she used to go and sit, literally, I think they call it the charnel grounds, like the grounds where they're, cremating the bodies, and she'd sit in graveyards and meditate there like all day and all night, and just be filled with disturbing imagery and ghosts and ghouls and goblins, all kinds of craziness. But when you sit in this way, and you sit and you don't move, you begin to discover that this growl, like this fire, this heat, it is you. It is your strength, your power. And if you look out at the universe at night, you see that this isn't just a world of like love and light and unicorns and bunny rabbits. It's a world where, stars are eating planets, and black holes are gobbling up, hundreds, if not thousands of stars. And because we are one with God, we're one with all the light, but we're also one with the radiant darkness. We're one with the black hole. We're one with violence, with destruction, with Kali. And this isn't an excuse to be violent, but this is an aspect of our nature. And, in the tantric traditions, this is embraced. In the warrior traditions, this is embraced. But in the Lululemon yoga tradition, it's not embraced, like everyone's supposed to be sweet and speak in hushed tones and, have a really good looking body, and I don't know how that became spirituality, but somehow that got mixed in there, and so this is a place that most people don't like to talk about. Most people are terrified of. Oftentimes the doorway into this is facing existential fear, existential terror. In the Kundalini group, this great fellow, this great yogi, Nick Shore, and he talked about his process of awakening, and he felt that he'd gone through this dismemberment process, just his body being ripped apart. And he's made all these incredible paintings where he's like detailed his process over the years. And some of the paintings were just him with brilliant light just shining out of him, and seeing the subways filled with light in New York City. And then other times it was his body being ripped apart, or feeling like he was possessed by a devil or a dark angel or some heaviness or something, and going through like this shamanic like dismemberment, process. In a sense, like Christ was nailed to a cross. It was not a lovely experience, but it led, to a fuller liberation and resurrection. And so it's quite amazing when we start to face the fear and walk into the darkness, and you begin to walk in that direction and see that I am the light, but I am also this radiant darkness. And in this radiant darkness is immense power. Immense power. And this goes back to that question that Richard was asking about embodiment. In order to be embodied, you have to embrace the darkness, because so much of what's in the body is heaviness, is darkness, is greed, lust, and fear, and death, and destruction, and anger, rage. But as you open to these things, you see they all have a spiritual component to them. Lust is really just a desire for union. Rage is really just, immense power. A power that can cut through and destroy, but then can create, can build, and build swiftly. And if the world's going to change, we have to be willing. We have to be willing to walk into ourselves and see what's here. There's this whole thing going on, the last couple of years of this whole cancel culture thing where everyone's getting canceled for this and that. And, what happens when you go inside and you realize how much darkness is within you, how much racism, how much genocide, how much bias, how much whatever. And you begin to see it just in yourself, in the collective, and when you're honest about it, in a funny way, instead of on the outside canceling people, we tend to be forgiving of people. We tend to be forgiving and saying, oh yeah, they have inherent bias, so do I. So does this one. It's in the nervous system. It's in the DNA. It's in the psyche. They have issues with anger, so do I. They have issues around, sexuality or intimacy, so do I. So do I. It's within me. It's within this one. So not only when you embrace the darkness, when you embrace the light, you say, oh, I'm one with God, and I'm one with light, and I'm one with beauty and divinity. When you embrace the darkness, you see, I'm one with hell and light and power and Buddha nature. And this sense of judgment, it really falls away. The judgment that we have of others as being wrong or bad. It doesn't mean that you stop evolving or make excuses for behavior. You still demand evolution, but there's no judgment around it about that person being so utterly bad. You see that? Oh yeah, they have confusion in them just like I do. It's within all of us. And so there's a radical humility that comes forward as we embrace the darkness. If we don't embrace the darkness, there's a good chance we'll have a big fat shadow and we'll actually become a dangerous person, or just someone who's a pain in the butt, like some spiritual people say, oh, you can't have a negative thought. It's like, oh, okay. Can't have a negative thought. Can't say anything negative. I'm a bad person, whatever. So anyways, beautiful question. Beautiful question. Here's a question from Conrad. Craig, what are your thoughts on Shiva and Shakti? In a real similar way that Matthew asked, there's just different forces of divinity. So Shiva, in a sense, is the vast, spacious, radiant darkness. Shakti is the light that comes forward. And again, we live in a both and world, not an either or world. What are your thoughts on Shiva and Shakti? I don't really have any thoughts about them, but I experience them both. I experience radiant Shakti to the point of me having trouble sleeping, and radiant Shiva. And so I encourage you, Conrad, to ask, what is your experience of Shiva and Shakti? Are you connected to the vast empty space, the darkness of night? And are you connected to the radiance of life that gives birth to the 10 trillion things? Okay. Let's see here. Okay, people don't like it that I said I wanted to choke everyone out in the octagon. Just for fun, just to prove the point that we're all individuals here. I don't want to hurt anyone, so I want to be clear about that. Let's see here. Thane writes, I am one with hell. What a powerful point about embracing the darkness. The darkness scares me. The darkness is going to scare everyone's ego. That's normal. That's natural. It's supposed to. You walk around at night, you might trip and hurt yourself. I was walking around the other night, I almost fell in the ocean, so you got swept away, eaten up by a shark. So it's good to be to have a little fear of the darkness, but when you open into it, like in meditation, you realize, oh, there's nothing here to be afraid of. It's just feeling, it's just energy. And people get too worked up in their ego about feeling and energy. Feeling and energy cannot kill you. Okay. Craig, why is it that once one moves up in consciousness, they lose their memory? That's a fun question. Is it because from a certain level of awareness, you're no longer identifying with the past and living only in the present? Yes. So all else falls away. Yes. I've heard of other spiritual teachers speak of this, and I'm curious. When you say you don't have a recollection of the past, does that truly mean all of it? No. Even the beautiful memories like the birth of a child, a vacation spent with loved ones. What about photographs or pictures on the internet? Do they bring back memories or feeling of emotion associated with that, or is it all truly gone? Yeah, so sometimes it's all truly gone, and sometimes much of it comes back. But I want you to imagine this. Like when you buy a brand new iMac from the Apple store, and you turn that machine on, it boots up right away, and it's just like it's clear and it's awake and it's alive and it's present to whatever the commands that you type into the computer. It's just like ready to go, ready to live. And so when I say I lost my memory, or when teachers speak about losing their memory, or anyone loses their memory, it's not Alzheimer's. You just feel more spacious inside. So when you're deeply identified with your ego and your personhood, you feel really solid, is the only way I can describe it. You feel like solid, condensed, like I am this character. But as that begins to dissolve and melt away, you start to feel more spacious, and there's great freedom there. And because you're more identified with the space, with the peace, with the emptiness, and with the silence, that solidity of ego, which is built upon memory and habit, most of it's not there. Most of it falls away. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a wondrous thing. Now, do I have memories? I have to work to pull out memories. If I'm trying to like find a certain memory, that's really hard. But what I do find is, like, say, for example, when I'm teaching and I speak about the past, it just comes forward and it flows through. But then as soon as I say it, it'll be gone. And, like my wife will ask me in a couple minutes, well, what'd you talk about tonight? Well, I don't know. I don't know what I spoke about. I have to write these YouTube descriptions. It says like, when I upload a video, I was like, what was it about? I'm like, I have to play the thing and pull out some lines because I can't remember what I spoke about. But there's a freedom in that. There's a being in the present moment. Like I don't miss my memories in any way. I'm not like, gosh, I wish I had all those memories. It's kind of like behind my computer here, I have a stack of old hard drives with, just stuff on it, I guess, backups and videos and all this kind of stuff. But I look at them and I'm like, what do I do with that? Like they're just going to sit there and gather dust. And when you live in the present, there's no real need for the past. There's no need for it. The past just clogs up the present. I'm not saying the past is bad. I'm not saying it's wrong. I certainly don't miss it. I certainly don't think about the glory days back in 86, whatever. It's like, can I remember the day my children were born? Yeah, of course I can. And so, anyways, the thing is when you start to experience the falling away of your old memories, you don't see it as a loss. I will say it is confusing. It's a little disorienting, but the freedom you get in its place is so much greater. So much greater. But you're certainly not going to miss it. Okay, let's see here. Did I do my part? me just look one more here. Craig, is it really possible for me to live a life where my needs for connection and touch are met? Of course. I'm trying really hard to find these things in my life, on my path, and so far felt starved for years. So one of the things that I've found is if we want anything outwardly, it's important to first find it inwardly. So if you want more love outwardly, can you love yourself more fully inwardly first? And so I noticed this in life, that I was starved myself personally for love and connection until I learned to love myself fully. When I learned to love myself fully and overwhelmed my own self with love, then I became overwhelmed on the outside with love. The same thing with, say, abundance and finances. When I ignored myself and made myself last and felt unworthy, I had no money, none. I was broke, I was in debt. The more I loved myself and saw that I was worthy, that I was good, that I supported myself with love and with kindness and nurturing energies, abundant energies started to come forth. So the more you love yourself, the more love you'll start to experience on the outside. So the more love you experience on the inside, the more it'll be reflected on the outside. Hey, Craig, I'm curious to know about manifesting. So Jacob, I'm going to say the same thing I said to Brett before. If I'm trying to manifest a relationship, for example, should one be taking action or allowing it to come in divine timing? So the action you need to take is to love yourself, Jacob. I also feel through my higher self, or God, is in control of what manifests in my life and not me and my human egoic self. Is it true for people at higher levels of the consciousness? So the way I look at manifesting is, if it's true manifestation, any true desire that you have is actually God's desire. So God put in us all the seed for love and connection and community. And God put in us a gift, which we are to share in this world. And these are all things that we must manifest. We're obligated to manifest. We need to bring them forward. We're not all meant just to sit in a cave by ourselves. We're not meant to sit in a cave by ourselves and just deny. We're meant to connect. We're meant to love, to be love, to give love, to share love, inwardly and outwardly. Inwardly and outwardly. And so, am I supposed to wait and allow it to come? It's kind of like you have to get up and go to work in the morning. So you put the work in, but you want to work in a way that's not anxious. So if you want a relationship, I encourage you to love yourself and put yourself out there and walk around the world with your eyes open. You don't need to be on 12 dating apps and this and that, but maybe you need to be on one. I don't know. But you need to put yourself out there if you want something. But sometimes God makes you find it in yourself first before it's given to you. So anyways, I think that's, I feel like I'm practicing self-love. Maybe I'm missing the mark then. Sometimes, Brett, we have to overwhelm ourselves with self-love before it actually manifests. So, and of course, like Jacob was saying, there might be a time frame. Sometimes God has us wait for a reason. But during the waiting time, if you're feeling any sense of emptiness, then keep loving yourself more fully. Flood yourself with love. Overwhelm yourself with love. To the point of, like normally at the point when we don't actually need anyone, then lots of love starts coming. Like when you love yourself so fully and completely that you don't need anyone, you feel totally comfortable in yourself, then true love comes. Then true love comes. That's often the case. So in some situations, God just makes you wait because God's trying to teach you another lesson. And, that's between you and God. God played that game with me a lot, where I was doing the work and I just did it really well. And, I was giving myself a gold star and a pat on the back. I'm like, I know I'm doing it right, God. But then, God said, well, I'm going to have you just wait a little longer because I want you to trust, and have the faith of a lion, So anyways, just a reminder again, if anyone joined late, please join us on retreat, April 9, 10, and 11, if you can. We have a kundalini group on Friday morning. That's good for Europeans to come to. It's good for the time zone for folks in Europe. Wednesday night meditations, Sunday night, we're here. And I'm going to challenge all of you back to that first question. And where do I say no? And where could I say yes a little more to life? How can I love more fully? I'll leave you with that. How can I love more fully? Good night, everyone. Thanks for your support. Thanks for sharing your hearts with me. Bye for now. See you next time.